Good evening, Peoria. Welcome to Whiskey Talks. My name is Andrew Nguyen, and tonight I have a treat for you. We have Jacob Becraft, originally from Metamora, and he is the CEO of Strand Therapeutics, as well as the founder of Peoria Bio Made. Welcome, Jake.
Hi, nice to be here, Andrew.
So, Jake, if you wouldn't mind to share with our viewers tonight, tell us about your story. How did you go from Metamora to what you're doing today?
Uh, okay, yeah. So it's been kind of a weird road. I think I went to Metamora High School and graduated in 2009. And while I was there, I was always very passionate about science. Did a lot of different sorts of was always bugging my science teachers kind of about biology teachers bugging them about different things I was curious about. I had a very influential physics teacher at Metamora, Mr. Nilika, who was really instrumental in kind of shaping my thought of what science and engineers can kind of do in the world. But I knew I wanted to make an impact in science, and I knew I wanted it to be in medicine. And so I started when I was living in Metamora, at Germantown Hills, actually. I was reading a lot of different science magazines and figured out I wanted to go into some sort of chemical or biomolecular sort of engineering route. So I went to the University of Illinois, studied there for 4 years in chemical and biomolecular engineering, got my bachelor's degree, and did a lot of research while I was there, focusing actually on this new field that I was discovering when I got there, called gene therapy. And so the idea with gene therapy is you can, all non-infectious diseases basically have some component that has to do with a genetic dysfunction. And gene therapy is the idea that using synthetic laboratory techniques that we've now developed, you can deliver synthetic genes into the body. And this field was really taking off around 2009, and then took off even further in the ensuing years. But I realized when I was finishing undergrad that in order to be like a scientist, I needed to dig in further. And so I decided to apply for a PhD program to look at gene therapy research further. I was just really lucky to be admitted into the biological engineering department at MIT. It was a kind of dream school for me ever since I was growing up. And so I went to MIT right after University of Illinois, and I started studying gene therapy research there. Became a scientist, though the thing about where MIT is, it's in the middle of the biotech hub. The biotech industry is based in the same neighborhood, basically, that Kendall Square, or that MIT is in, called Kendall Square. And I got exposed to what the biotech industry was doing for the world, and all of the different nuts and bolts of how we get these new revolutionary therapies out to people. And I got taken up in that ecosystem, and I ended up having some research at MIT that was, I thought, influential if we could translate it into therapies for the rest of the world. And so I founded my company, Strand Therapeutics, with some MIT professors and with one of my lab mates. And we went out, went to Silicon Valley, got a bunch of venture capitalists to give us a couple $1 million, launched the company. Then, as far as what I wanted to do after that had to do with as I started to scale the company, I started to realize issues in the biotech industry, right? So one of the issues being what's called biomanufacturing. So when we have these new therapies like the mRNA vaccine that Moderna is developing, these new breakthrough therapies that are the front lines of our battle against COVID. The problem is that these therapies are very complex to make. They require a specialized workforce with specialized equipment just to manufacture them. But they're hard. It's hard to do in the Boston area. The economics of how you build these manufacturing plants and the footprint required and the sort of billable overheads start to get very difficult for companies to handle. And so I was lucky enough to have a connection into a few key people in the Peoria area, including Jim Ardis, who just announced yesterday he won't be running for re-election of Peoria. And so, sad to see Jim go. Definitely, he was a mayor when I was still in Peoria. But we got to we got to talking with a number of local people, and it got in my head that Peoria could be also a site of biomanufacturing, and so that's why I launched Peoria Bio Made, is to start to think about Peoria as how it could be the center of a new economic boom in the biotech industry.
Thank you, Jake, for that wonderful summary. But I want to kind of like go backwards a little bit,
Go for
right?
it.
So it sounds like, you knew from when you were born that you were going to be a scientist. Would that be
Yeah,
accurate? Or were there people in your life, key people in your life, in your family perhaps, that were influential in that journey?
absolutely. Yeah. So, it's interesting. My sister and I are both scientists. My sister is a food chemist, and she works for NASA in Houston. And I, am a PhD scientist and run this company. But we don't really come from a family of scientists. There's one engineer who married in. And so for the most part, it was something that was just in my head since I was little. Actually, I wanted to be a paleontologist. When I was 4 years old, I wanted to be a paleontologist. And this was, I think it was before Jurassic Park. I can't be sure, but Jurassic Park was really more of a genetics thing to me when I saw it, and probably led to me going into genetics. But paleontology and dinosaurs caught my mind, and I took a very scientific approach. And the person who was the most influential there was actually my grandmother, Carol Reynolds. She lifelong Peorian. Her husband, my grandfather Warren, was chairman of the county board, I believe, and very involved in Peoria for his entire life. And my grandma she bought every imaginable science kit you could think of. From digging up dinosaur bones to chemistry sorts of things to rock collections. I know she went to Italy. She brought me back like different sorts of rock collections and fossils from there, and we talked about them. And then we do science kits and play in the woods, and she would allow me to like play scientist, and it was just really a nurturing of, I think, my general curiosity that I think could have easily been turned to, could have easily been said like, just go play outside or whatever, go play in the mud, or here's a magnifying glass. But she really she's a former educator, and she constantly just spurred me on. I mean, she took me to, when Sue came to the Field Museum, I got to skip the first day of third grade and take a bus trip with her on Peoria Charter Coach to the Field Museum to see the new Sue exhibit, which is this huge Tyrannosaurus Rex that they had gotten. And so, yeah, basically from there until I was probably in high school, I thought I was going to be a paleontologist. And then some actual paleontologists kind of talked me out of it. They're like, go do more applied science.
Did they say, I'm going to be spending lots of time digging in the sun, hot sun and stuff?
That is
Or what's the
exactly
thing
what
that
they
turned
said,
off?
actually. He's, a paleontologist actually at the Field Museum once, I think when I was maybe like 11 or 12, told him I wanted to be a paleontologist. And he was like, oh, you're going to dig in the field all day in the sun and not find anything, and then go back there the next day. And he really painted a bleak, bleak image of it. And, I was starting to be captured by medical technology that I was reading about. And I saw genetics as kind of the forefront, because we were coming off of the genetics revolution where we were sequencing the human genome and doing all that sort of thing. While I was in junior high, we had announced the sequencing of the human genome. And I kind of remember those sorts of announcements. And then we were just getting into where we were applying genetics as like gene therapies, and all the way to where we are today, where the gene therapies could be our key to defeating COVID. It's just a kind of crazy, wild ride of science advancements.
Yeah, so so you were nurtured at home by your family, the early exposure to science and technology and research. Um, and then you went on to high school, and can you share a little bit more about what that experience was like? Because translating it from a family sort of informal learning background, and then really moving on to high school and then to your undergraduate years, how did that evolve?
Yeah, I think that Metamora was an interesting high school, and the science department there. I always really felt good. I always felt comfortable in science. Science and math were kind of like, unsurprisingly, what felt comfortable. One of I think Mr. Nilika at Metamora was he was my physics teacher for the last 2 years I was there, and was a highly influential kind of person in shaping a lot of the things of what I decided to go after. He talked a lot about experiential learning, and how learning is not about a teacher dumping facts into your brain. It's really about teaching people, giving people the tools that allow them to solve problems. It was almost like a thing students would kind of make fun of, because he had this big speech he'd give to the first year physics students every year, where he would like pour water from one pitcher into another, and he was like, "This is traditional teaching," and then he'd be like, "But that's not what we're going to do. We're going to do this, and you're going to be problem solvers," and he'd say that. And but the thing was, he backed it up. Like, it wasn't just like BS. It was really, when you got into his class, he always made it feel like you were solving the problems together. Now, those problems happen to be physics phenomenons that had been figured out by Isaac Newton 400 years ago, but he made you feel like, he didn't tell you what the answers were. He really like led you to the water and let you drink at the fountain, right? And that was, I think, probably the first time that I truly felt like I got the first feeling of exploratory science. Even though, we're not breaking any ground in physics, we're not figuring out Newtonian mechanics again, but he made it feel like that, right? Because you didn't know it. You're a 16-year-old in physics class. You don't know what acceleration is or whatever. So it was, when I look back on it, I think that was really like what made me think, what really probably solidified my move to engineering over just traditional science too, where you could find out physical truths about the physical world, and then use those truths to design solutions in other sorts of ways. And for that, I was like, that's what I'm interested in doing. I'm interested in building things.
So it sounds like there were these aha moments for you through the science classes, and as a result of that, that led to some early ambitions in internships. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, so I think that it's important. And one of the things I've been doing with interacting back with the Peoria area is finding more ways that inquisitive young minds can get involved with hands-on learning, right? I think when I was in high school, all I wanted to do was do science. And there's just there's not a whole lot of necessary opportunities for high schoolers in the area like that. And so I spent most of my time lifeguarding, but I did have some, kind of great experiences doing like these little internships. One at the Ag Lab was really great. I got to work there and learn about polymer chemistry and kind of how that worked. And they had us like basically repeat some experiments they had done like a year before. And I got to job shadow one of my high school classmates' dads, who was a scientist at the ag lab, and I got to job shadow him once, and that was awesome. Really just seeing, what is it like to figure out science. But I also spent a lot of time like designing my own experiments at home, right? I would try to figure out ways to like preserve different like biological materials. Like how can you do this so you can like study them later? And what is going on in like fungi out in my yard, right? And can I like identify different ones? Super nerdy stuff. Like, I mean, really, like I was playing football and on the wrestling team at the time. I was not telling any of my coaches or classmates that I was like spending my weekends like looking at moths and shit. But I was like, I was doing that. But I think what's important is like I was so hungry for these sorts of things that I think we can bring back to Peoria and start to foster that knowledge early on. I've taken on high schoolers at MIT before. I think I've seen kind of how different cities can interface with their youth. But yeah, I mean, by the time I got to University of Illinois, I was so gung ho to do science that like day one, I think I sent like 6 professors an email and was like, "Hey, your research looks cool. I looked it up over the summer. Could I work in your lab?" And most of them were like, "You don't know anything. You're basically a high school senior plus 4 months. There's no reason for you to work in my lab. Sorry, we're full." And this one professor named Dan Pack, Dr. Dan Pack, he was like, "Sure, kid, like, here's my grad students. Maybe one of them will want to take you on." And this grad student named Mark Huang, who was, a little bit older than me, obviously, an MD, PhD student there, took me on, and I worked with him, and he just taught me a lot of stuff. He taught me how to actually do science. I was like 18 and in his lab, just, figuring out how to drink at nights as my freshman year of college and figuring out how to do science during the days. And, in my spare time taking classes. And so I think that was a big part of what I wanted to do. But one of the things that happens at Illinois, that a lot of people who have gone to University of Illinois will probably know, if you're from Central Illinois, is you immediately meet a ton of people who went to school in Chicago or the Chicago suburbs, which a lot of those kids, especially the high level science and math kids, they had a lot more opportunities. And so it felt, at first it's kind of intimidating. It's like, oh shit, like this kid did a PCR reaction like when he was 16. What do I know? I'm so far behind. In reality, you're not really behind, but it feels like you're behind. And so when I saw that, one of the things I kind of made a mental note in my head was like, if I ever get to a point where I can make a change here, where I can put these resources back into Central Illinois and have opportunities to nurture this sort of environment there, absolutely going to do that. So.
Yeah, wow, that sounds really awesome. I would also say, it's pretty rare as an undergraduate just coming in your freshman year to be working in a lab.
Yeah, I mean, well, a lot of them won't hire you because you don't know anything. You can't really be helpful unless you're willing to like put in some hours. Like, I mean, I came in and I didn't know any, like the grad student I worked with had to teach me literally everything. And I still, like, Mark and I are friends to this day, still keep in contact with him just because it was a formative experience. It's interesting though, in terms of paying it forward, and I think more people would do well to pay it forward. When I got to MIT, I had told myself in undergrad, if I have the opportunity to get a freshman and teach them from the ground up, like every single thing, I am going to do that 100%. And then my halfway through my second year of grad school, the exact same thing happened. This kid named Bremy Albuquerque from the Bronx sent an email, and he was like, "Hey, I don't know anything, but I'm interested. Can I work in your lab?" And my boss, Ron Weiss, the director of the Synthetic Biology Center at MIT, sent it to me and was like, do you want this kid? And I was like, fuck yeah, yeah, man. I'm like, give me him. I'm gonna teach him. Like, and he didn't know shit. Like he set himself on fire. Like the second week, he set his lab coat on fire. It wasn't the end of the world. We put it out. But it's kind of like, putting that forward. And him and I are friends of this day. He's in graduate school now in New York City at Rockefeller University, and off to becoming a PhD himself. So I feel like I at least put one foot forward again. You gotta give back to kind of be the change you want to see or whatever.
Yeah, so I think you really make such a great point. The persistence, right? Not taking no for an answer. And so, to our viewers out there, if you are looking for opportunities, I would not take no, and learn from this example from Jake. He cold called, he pushed and shoved and made it happen. And here you are.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think in anytime you want to do something, you're gonna have to be ready to just hear no, right? Anytime you want to do something different, right? If you want to go get a normal job doing normal things at a normal place, you'll probably hear no a lot less. You might still hear no from a job application or no response, but you have to, no matter what you want to do, if you're passionate about something, first you have to be unfazed by the word no, or not right now, or it's too early, or any of that. You need to just kind of say, like, you know what, screw this. Like, this is what I want to do, and I'll find some way to do it in some manner. That's just what I'm going to do. Otherwise, if you take like the first 5 people that tell you you're crazy, or or it's, you can't do this right now, then you're definitely not going to do. You're never going to do it, because there's always haters.
Absolutely. And a lot of times, people are just trying to protect their time and resources, right?
Right.
One good yes must be protected by 1,000 no's. And that's the same thing for you right now, isn't it?
Right. I think, everything is an opportunity. Every no is just an opportunity to find someone that fits better with you. Looking back on all the different things that I had done throughout, life, from the internships at the early internships at University of Illinois to, getting into graduate schools, some graduate schools that I wanted to go to, like Stanford and stuff, I didn't get into. So, that at the time I was a little beaten up about it, but, MIT was also top of my list. So, I got lucky there. But, when I came to MIT, there were things I wanted to do that I didn't actually get to do, and got told no, and ended up in other places with other people who wanted me, were excited by my personality and what I wanted to do. And the same thing happened when I started Strand. There was a lot of investors that told us no, or had a bunch of more condescending or rude things to say to, a 26-year-old biotech CEO. But by the people that we did end up with, I could not be more happy with, right? It's a no is an opportunity to find the group that you actually should be with. If the first person you go to always says yes, you're probably going to end up in an unoptimized sort of system. So, it's like dating, right? You can marry your high school sweetheart and, like, whatever, like, do it. Not going to shit on that. But, more likely than not, you should probably kiss a few frogs to find out, just how special that final person is.
Yeah. So, great segue into your sort of startup world with Strand Therapeutics. I want to focus now on how did you go from PhD to launching your spin out?
Yeah. God, I don't know. You tell me, man. It's been a blur. I don't really remember. No, it's it's been a weird road, right? So I think what's important is that people, when they're in school, continue to get different sorts of experiences, right? And you're constantly learning about what else is out there. And so actually, when I was at MIT, I was part of a much larger group of guys and was only tangentially involved in this, but a group of graduate students, and it shouldn't say guys and girls, right? A group of people who were launching what we called the MIT Biotech Group. And the point of this was that when you're in graduate school, there's a lot of pressure to try to get a faculty position, right? Try to do research and then try to become a professor. But the problem with that approach is that it blinds you to all of the awesome opportunities that are out there. And so we started, this group got started that was all about bringing the graduate students and the undergraduates within the fields of biology and biotech and biological engineering, bringing everyone together and talking to people who are patent attorneys, people who work in the government, people who are politicians. And we're MIT, we have a pretty good alumni basis, right? Of people that do all sorts of stuff. But so people understood what all was out there, investing and startups and all of these different stuff that you can build. And then through that actual program, I then got exposed to the world of venture capital. I got to do some internships there. I guess the whole thing is that you need to never be satisfied with just learning the one thing, right? Especially on long timelines. Like, don't spread yourself so thin that you are ineffective in whatever you do. But really, to me, it's still about keeping a healthy diversity of interest, right? So I didn't know what I wanted to do. I still wanted to be a professor by the time I was in my third year of grad school. I was like, I'm going to be a professor, and then I'll do research, and then I'll spin it out into companies. It'll be really cool. And then by my third year, I started interning and working with some venture capital groups, learning what investing is like in the technology and biotech sectors, and learning about startups, taking some classes in that, learning all about like what makes a startup tick. I got to meet some fairly famous MIT startup people. Drew Houston was one of them. He is the founder and current CEO of Dropbox. I got to have coffee with him in San Francisco once through a MIT event and have him talk to me about launching Dropbox from his one-bedroom apartment with 3 dudes living in it. And, you get to just constantly try to suck up the wisdom of all the people around you, take as many diverse classes, especially when you're young, right? Like when you're young, you have the ability to take on lots of risks, not a whole lot of people kind of depending on you. Of course, this is dependent on your own economic background, which is its own kind of thing I think we should try to solve for people. But you can take on more risks if you don't have a spouse and children and dependents and all of that. And you also know how to live cheap, right? I was living in Boston, probably one of the 3 most expensive cities in the entire country, on $31,000 a year, pre-taxes. So I knew how to live like a pauper. And when you do that, it frees you up to kind of take different sorts of risks, view yourself as an eternal student, and continue to always be learning. And so I guess this is a very long way, Andrew, of telling of answering your original question, which is how did I end up here? I got this intro into venture capital, and I realized that while I liked venture capital, what I liked about venture capital was the closeness to startups and building things and how exciting that was. But what I really wanted to do was actually build those things. And so my original goal was that I would go into venture capital, build a network, build some clout, and then launch a company later once I had that network. But what ended up actually happening was right before I made that call of going to a venture capital group, my previous lab mate who had gone on and was working at a hedge fund got back in touch with me, and he was like, "Hey, are you following clinical trials in oncology?" I was like, "Absolutely not. Like, I don't know why I would be following that. It's a weird thing to follow if it's not your job." And he was like, well, here's some things, and sent me a bunch of papers. We started talking, and he was like, this is a huge unmet need. Like, there is no one doing this technology in this way. We have the perfect solution to so many different things. This would be a revolutionary, transformative company that can change the way that we develop medicines. And so that was a pretty cool thing to realize. And so we ended up, trying to spin the company out. And that was before I left MIT. Actually, I was still at MIT. I was finishing my PhD. Within 6 weeks of each other, I closed our first venture round of funding, $6 million. Then I defended my PhD, did my public defense of all of my work, and officially graduated, and then got married, all within a 6-week period. That was a pretty intense time. And at the time, I just kept telling myself, like, this is something I will tell people I did. That's how I dealt with the stress of it, because it was definitely a stressful time.
And was the trust center? Were you at the trust center? How did the experience at MIT, help your, launch of your startup, and of course the free instant noodles in the cupboards over there?
Yeah, so the Trust Center at MIT, that's the Center for Entrepreneurship at MIT, is this fantastic place that Martin Trust, a famous entrepreneur, gave a ton of money back to MIT to create this basic center for entrepreneurship, and it's a place that has office spaces and meeting areas and free cups of noodles and coffee and places to meet. And they host talks, and they have entrepreneurs in residence there, people that you can go to and bounce ideas off of. And some of those EIRs are very dear, close friends of mine. That was a huge resource. I think all universities should really strive to set up some sort of entrepreneurship access, and that can also teach classes. I think one of the big thing, an interesting thing that I got to do through the Trust Center was go to Hong Kong and learn about hardware manufacturing, how manufacturing is done. And again, this is back to the thing of, like, never learn one thing. I remember telling my boss at MIT, the professor I was working for, that I was going to go to Hong Kong for 3 weeks to study hardware manufacturing. And he was like, are you interested in bioelectronics? And I was like, no, I'm not. He's like, what are you interested in hardware manufacturing for? I was like, I'm interested in learning about entrepreneurship and figuring it out through, another thing. Not everything needs to be all day the one thing that I already know, right? There's an asymptote, there's an upper limit of how much you can learn of any one thing. And you can increase that by learning other tangential things. And then all of a sudden you see things in a new light. But if you just look down one corridor, you're just going to see that one option. And so I started doing some of those courses. I went to Hong Kong. I took this class. Actually, 6 months later, then I went back to Hong Kong and taught the class as a TA. It was through the Trust Center and through areas, like, I think the big thing is just, like, more schools should prioritize. You don't need the fanciest library. What you need is resources, and you need resources and classes and places where kids can meet, and ways to if you want to encourage entrepreneurship, if you want to encourage just free thinking, you should be giving people places that they can meet. The word safe spaces, I think, has been overused as a bad word at this point, but really it's about creating places where people can, get together that, aren't Starbucks.
Yeah, so great point with social collisions. I'd like to introduce that as a word, but also the diversity of the people that you meet at the Trust Center. And like you were saying, learning by doing, that exposure is so incredible and is so helpful, hasn't it been for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Learning by doing and hands-on education is I mean, that's what was most effective to me in high school with Mr. Nilika's class. And really, like, that's where I've had the most growth over my entire career, is like, just go in and figure it out.
Yeah, so let's move on to the next part, which is you've launched your startup, your that's growing and scaling. Now, more recently in our conversations, we've been talking about Peoria Bio Made. That's the foundation that you've just created.
Yeah. Yeah, so this launches back to aspects of what I've seen working in the biotech ecosystem, working in Kendall Square, and also never really leaving, uh, never really removing from the table like what Peoria, how to give back to Peoria, or how to foster growth in the city, right? And so what's important here is my grandfather, this man named Warren Reynolds. He was on the city council. He's a county board member. He's just did a million different things. I couldn't even list his resume that he did after he retired from Keystone. He retired from Keystone at 50 something after a 30-year career, and then went on another 30 something years of serving the Peoria area. With his, he was, I think he was retired for 31 years before he passed away after a 30-year career. So, boys and girls, that's why we don't have pensions anymore. But what I always thought was what he always fostered in me, and really my whole family on that side, his wife, my grandmother Carol Reynolds, and her brother and his wife Owen, and also Carol Reynolds, my great aunt and uncle, have been big forces in the Peoria area, working for causes to help the city develop, and really everything. And so that's basically been banged into my head since I was a kid, and it's something I do believe in, right? I mean, you only have one hometown. You really only, I mean, unless you're an army brat, I guess, you really only kind of get one hometown. And I truly do believe that Peoria can be a major player in the national and global economy, outside of just Caterpillar, if we invest in areas that we can be innovative in. And so I think when it comes to biomanufacturing, so the idea of creating different biologics for the new revolution that's coming in medicine, these new next generation therapies, there's no headquarters of this new technology, for the manufacturing of this new technology. It's done outside of cities that have a lot of the companies that do it, like Boston, where there's a lot of biotech research and development. It's done outside of those cities, outside of San Diego and San Francisco, which have similar sorts of companies. But that proximity is really just because it's just there, right? It's just, well, it's easiest to put it in our backyard, but it's also not economically viable. It's still very expensive, even in the Boston suburbs, to set these things up. That also being said, is when I started thinking about Peoria historically, right? Peoria is one of the biggest innovations that I think Peoria has contributed to the world, is the discovery of the mass production of penicillin, right? And so mass producing penicillin was probably the world's first biomanufacturing innovation. For people who don't know, during World War II, the Peoria Ag Lab discovered how we would mass produce penicillin there wasn't enough penicillin to support the war efforts or to really support our medical efforts. And they discovered a way to mass produce it at the Peoria Ag Lab and scaled it up. And it gave the troops on the European front basically a huge advantage. They were coming out of surgeries faster. They were coming out of being injured faster. They were being replenished. And we had tens of thousands of lives saved, basically because of this drug. And so that's sort of an ethos that underlies Peoria. And then in more recent years, the next generation manufacturing that's gone on at Caterpillar, the sorts of infrastructures that have been built out there for a number of different industries, I think really shows that Peoria is a place that that knows how to build things, right? There's research and development hotspots like San Francisco and Boston, and there's how do you actually make that, how do you bring that into the real world on a way that is scalable? And as technology increases, the technological advances that we need to have for these manufacturing infrastructures also increases. And so that goes all the way to say, like, I believe that Peoria can and should be the headquarters of the forthcoming biomanufacturing industry. I mean, the bioeconomy of the World Economic Forum is predicted to be $1 trillion by 2030. So we're talking about how can Peoria be a player in a $1 trillion economy? And I believe that it's really about kind of three big pieces, right? We need to train a workforce. We need to work with educational leaders, the same way Caterpillar has worked with Illinois Central College to create hands-on learning technologies for tractor manufacturing. We should be working with places like Bradley University to create hands-on learning experience for science and math students and biology and chemistry majors and recent graduates who are native to Peoria to learn those skills that could help them succeed in a biomanufacturing job, either outside of Peoria or with jobs that could one day come to Peoria. A second part is attracting high nucleation forces, right? And so in my mind, that actually has to do with working with federal leaders, federal government leaders, people like Congressman Darren LaHood, people like Congresswoman Cherry Bustos, people like Senator Durbin and Senator Duckworth, people who can work in, who are incentivized to bring jobs to Peoria, but in ways that help, right? If we look at the history of Silicon Valley, it was nucleated by federal investments for R&D. People who say that Stanford exists and then all of a sudden Stanford was there and then all of a sudden Silicon Valley existed are probably lying. Maybe they just don't know. But for 15 years before any consumer electronics companies existed in Silicon Valley, the Defense Department was plowing money into silicon wafer research in Palo Alto. And that eventually merged into where silicon wafers became cheap enough to be in consumer goods. And then that led to a spurring of companies like IBM and then Apple. The rest is kind of history as that blew up into the behemoth of the technology industry that it is today. Same with Boston and biotech, right? It's a lot of federal money that came in to support different areas. And so if you want to look at how industries get started, that's a huge piece of it. And so part of what Peoria Bio Made seeks to do is at least advocate or bring to the attention of our leaders, exactly how we can be transformative there. And then the third is working to recruit more companies. As we start to build this infrastructure, as we start to train a workforce, as we start to, hopefully raise money and raise that money to build out, lab spaces in the warehouse district or all over the city where companies can easily plug into, lower the bar kind of for these groups, and then work through our network at Peoria Bio Made to recruit companies to see, like, Peoria is an area where you can have a branch that is tackling these abilities in a community that people enjoy living in, with a bill in terms of overhead that is orders of magnitude lower than what you would pay to go into somewhere like the Boston suburbs.
So that is such a great point. The fact that you mentioned that biomanufacturing at this point so far has been fairly arbitrary, and you're making really good points on the historical significance of Peoria, the discovery of mass production of penicillin here, and all these cost-effective opportunities. So I guess from a person and a viewer watching this today, how do you think they can engage to we've already started this, you've started the conversation and you've reached out to all the different people, the Congress people and the senators. How can the average user, the viewer, engage and to say, hey, I'm on board too? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the first and easiest thing anyone can do is go to peoriabiomade.org, our website, and just sign up and get on our contact list. We're not sure what we're going to do in COVID era right now, but as we start to form our programmatic themes, we're starting to build out different events and different sorts of fundraising that we may be doing, that will allow us to expand programs that allow us to raise awareness of Peoria, of Biomade, and I think eventually start to even finance some of the infrastructure of build outs of things like that. You can call your local representative and tell them that you support this. Your local representative should know that everyone in Peoria's local representatives have supported this, but it always helps to hear from more constituents. And I'm not a registered voter in Peoria, so maybe they care less about my opinion. But from registered voters in Peoria, it's always helpful to call your local representatives, call their office, and be like, hey, I'm hearing a lot about the bioeconomy and what it can do in Peoria, and those are the types of jobs and economic stimulus that we need here. What are you doing to continue to work in that direction? That sort of pressure, people think that people think that calling their representatives is not effective in terms of enacting change, but it absolutely is. I can tell you, I did a lot of lobbying for science policy back when I was at MIT, and contacting your representatives will really do a lot to show them that there is constituent support for these sorts of initiatives. And people who, if you don't call, then they'll think maybe it's important, maybe it's not. So being plugged in to our network and staying tuned for the events that we'll have coming up. You can sign up on the website, and then just doing any sort of pushes into any sorts of representatives is something that I think at this point is just going to be really helpful for as we get our feet under ourselves.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And so, trick question here, Jake. If you had a magic wand today, what do you want to see happen?
Yeah. If Peoria Bio Made could have a magic wand that does exactly how I see the future is, I imagine that we revitalize the warehouse district, right? So right now, the warehouse district reminds me of what Kendall Square used to look like 30 years ago. Kendall Square was filled with warehouses that were empty, not a whole lot going on. And as the biotech industry picked up in Boston, Kendall Square transformed into this cityscape. It's probably one of the most, I think it has some of the highest revenues of the entire country, comparable to places like Wall Street and Silicon Valley. And so where I would see is, a warehouse district that's completely transformed, keep the bones of old Peoria alive, keep the culture and the identity of what that was like. But, I imagine walking down a warehouse district that's filled with, bars and restaurants, and above them there are these next generation labs making all sorts of biomolecules, and filled with all sorts of local Peoria native scientists that now are, have a part in this huge piece of this growing economy, have these great salaries that are supporting like a local that are supporting like the influx of bars and restaurants and things to do that just completely is gleaning and almost futuristic. I see one of the things that we have to think about, if you want to really think big, if you want to think about how do we not just help, but how do we transform, right? How do we transfigure Peoria into a not making it a major city? That's not the goal, right? But the goal is to make it a real kind of economic hotbed with tons of opportunities where our students can graduate college and come back, or graduate locally and stay and have great opportunities in the high-tech industries. I think for that we need to build industries that don't just increase the circulation of capital within Peoria, but actually bring in outside funding, right? If we have manufacturing going on, you have a global world of therapeutics, and that money is flowing back in to the Peoria economy. It's flowing into scientists who live there, who are spending it on restaurants and things to do with their kids and new clubs. And as you start to shift that, I mean, it's almost similar to a shift that parts of Boston went through over the past 40 years, right? Boston is a much smaller town, a working class town, and I don't think that the goal is to change Peoria like that, but really just to stimulate it, to build economic opportunity to where, kids like me, when they're in high school, can go and have internship opportunities to learn science. Then they can go off to college and even come back to the same area that they grew up in, be, with their families, but continue to have these, high potential, high paying, highly innovative careers right there in the area. I think that is a future for Peoria that that I would snap my fingers or wave my magic wand and make happen. But since I don't have a magic wand, we're just going to keep pushing until we make it happen. And I think with the support of the community, ideally we'll be able to, make that a reality.
Oh, thank you, Jake. We've discussed the entire sort of story of how we can improve the greater Peoria area, revitalize, continue that same quality of life, and also, help the hardworking residents and citizens of this central Illinois heart be a beacon of light in the nation. I guess I would want to end with one final question. If one of the CEOs and the chairmen of these large pharmaceuticals were listening into this broadcast, what would you say to them to encourage them to even explore the Greater Peoria region?
I'd say think more creatively about your manufacturing infrastructure, right? Think, don't write off manufacturing as something that you stick in, wherever else your discovery science is going. Think about it as a discrete innovation, and then think about where you can get the most bang for your buck. Look at the way that the Peoria community has embraced it's one Fortune 500 company, Caterpillar, right? Look at the way that has become a community member and helped to create a culture of Peoria, and how the community has rallied around that as a piece of economic prosperity for the area. I think the goal here is that we attract more of that, right? I think what Caterpillar has done for the community is fantastic. I would like to see more companies there so that, it's not a kind of single company tied to the city. I think that the large pharmas or bigger biotechs that are looking for how to create, how to be innovative, should definitely consider Peoria as a spot where they can come in and actually have a positive community impact, have a happier workforce, and also just get more bang for their buck and be really innovative about it, be creative. Peoria is the city for that sort of a thing, that sort of an innovation.
Jake, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It's significantly been insightful to have this conversation with you. And we look forward to engaging with you more at Distillery Labs and the Greater Peoria Economic Development Council. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Andrew. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.